I'm very happy to be here to talk about soil health and share with you a little of what I know about it. I've been working in soil health for the past 36 years. We call it Regen Ag today. 36 years ago, we would be talking about soil conservation, soil and water conservation. It became sustainable agriculture. We went through agroecology, agronomy. We went through best management practices. And now we're up to Regen Ag. But for me, really, it's always been about soil health. We look at the field and we put a judgment into it. And so when we look at it, we say, oh, that's a very nice looking cover crop field. We've been talking a lot about root system. We've got a lot of roots in our system. But yet, as we dig a little, you can find that in that field, every radishes were just going 90 degrees to the surface. It was just about 4 inches deep. So what I want to put some emphasis on my talk today is the real soil potential. I'm always saying that the real soil potential is that 40 inches, that 30 inches deep. But what we're doing really is that when you look at this picture here, you can see that there are some very brownish soil very deep into it. And at 40 inches deep, you could see that there is still some roots growing there. And we put a lot of effort in the top 6 to 8 inches, what I call the direct intervention zone. So we're doing a lot of work there, plowing, disking, disturbing the soil, planting, and harvesting at the end. But yet, all of this work that we're doing, and we're doing it with the idea that we're doing something good, has what I call collateral damages with soil compaction, soil surface pulverization as well, and of course, erosion. Well, then I get into that, what I call the costly intervention. And so we're doing some subsoil, drainage, leveling, and again, we're not gonna get through the whole soil profile. So I wanna talk to you today about the crop concept we've been working with for the past years, and also soil compaction. Does that make sense to you? It's okay, because I can talk about a lot of things. Like the Stanley Cup that was just won 2 nights ago. Do you know the Stanley Cup? Oh, come on, you guys. It all starts, yeah. There's a Canadian over there. It all starts with the sun. We cannot do anything without the sun. A lot of people are saying it. John Kemp, just before me, spent a lot of time talking about the photosynthesis. And of course, this photosynthesis is central to life. And then all that carbon that we're picking up will go in the soil. And as our soil is efficient, as our soil is healthy, then we're gonna have a very high efficiency, because half of that, part of it is going back to the atmosphere. CO2, of course, but N2O as well. And when we talk about gas effect, this is what we're talking about, and we want to avoid that as much as we can. Soil compaction is putting in light our relationship to the soil. We have here 2 pictures, a very compacted one and a more aerated soil. The first thing that the literature is telling us is the diffusion rate of all of these nutrients. So if you look at the nitrogen, for example, its diffusion rate goes from 0.9 to 2.9 millimeter per day. So wherever you have that nitrogen molecule, it will move around in the soil at this rate, depending if you're on the compacted size or on the healthy size. It's the same thing for the phosphorus, which is 0.009 to 0.29 millimeter per day, and potassium, which is 0.29 to 0.9 millimeter per day. So compaction is really something that we should avoid if we want to have a better rate of diffusion in our soil. Not only that, the root system. John just talked about a lot about the root system, but then you have the root system, you have the small roots that goes around it, and you also have the mycorrhiza. If you look, excuse me, I went too fast there. If you look at their dimension, their diameter, again, you can understand very easily that because in a compacted soil, these roots are not going to be able to grow and find all the space they need. So we have to think about soil compaction. The challenge that we have is we have to maximize the root growth. We need the roots to be able to grow. And for that, we need to make sure that there is enough space, and we have to have a thinking about soil compaction. You've all seen these graphs, right? You need to answer me. I need to know that you're there. So you have that well-structured soil and you have the compacted soil. You've seen that already. I like to put it in real picture. So this is a well-structured soil, and then you have the compacted one. And you can already feel that there's a problem. This is the same type of soil. This is the same soil series that I'm showing here. On one, the compacted one has an infiltration rate of 0.05 meter per day. The healthy one has an infiltration rate of 1 meter per day. So that shows that within the same series of soil, depending on the management practices, we can go from a very compacted soil to a very healthy soil. We can go to a soil that will need a lot of human intervention to be able to produce, to a soil that will be able to produce by itself a lot of grain and so on. And so this is one thing, and I'm going to talk about that tomorrow. We've got to look at our soil profile. Again, we don't do that enough. We've got to get our shovel and dig at least 90 centimeter deep to find out what's going on in there. And this will have a big impact on the water management of our soil. In a very healthy soil, you're going to see a lot of spaces for the water and the air to go through, and a very high water holding capacity. As in a very poor soil, then you see that the amount of air is a lot less. The amount of the water holding capacity is a lot less. And then you also have a problem of excess water. As the water is as the water filled all of this soil, then the excess water has to go away by runoff. So I need to improve my soil. The other thing that is really important to understand is that the porosity has to have that continuity. You know, we talk about porosity and then we talk about capillarity. The water goes to the plant, and as it depletes from the surface, then it has to come from down from the soil up to the plant. If you have a poor soil, there's very few spaces for the water to get to your plant. Does that make any sense? How many of you are farmers? How many of you have done soil profile? Oh, wow. I'm going to go and live here. And this is what happens when you have a poor soil. Then you have a poor root system. I don't know if you can feel it, but this root is growing only on a two dimension. It only grows where it finds spaces. So you guys are really doing soil profile? I'm really impressed. I'm really impressed because I used to work with farmers that look at me dig. You know, I go to the field and I dig the soil, and then I ask them to help me, and they tell me that something like, "Are you crazy?" So I keep digging on my own. To protect our soil porosity, the compaction part, the first element that compacts a lot of soil is our tractor, right? So you're all farmers, you're all digging, but when I talk about tractors, you don't answer. Now I doubt you're really farmers. The compaction, you know that compaction goes from surface compaction and subsurface compaction, right? You know what affects surface compaction? Please, I need that. Do you know, yes or no? Who knows? Excuse me? Well, the surface compaction will be affected by the air pressure in your tire. And as you can see here, if you diminish the air pressure, you're going to have a lighter effect at soil surface. It's going to be, the tire will sink less because it has a larger surface area. It will affect the slope as well. So this slope that it has to rise, we don't see it by eyes, but scientifically it was measured. So it pushes the soil on top, and it does increase soil surface compaction. And this is what you can see. Same tire, same weight on the tire. You have the 9 pound, which is, sorry, I forgot to translate that in bar. 1 bar is 14 pound per square inch. So it's just about 0.8 bar compared to 1.8 bar. So you see the difference in the surface area, which is just about 40% bigger. And we need to think about that. I don't know here, but the argument I've always get in Quebec is that you put high tire pressure because you go on the road. And I'm always making the calculations is you're going to spend 4 hours, 5, 6, 8 hours in your field, but 15 minutes in the road, but yet you're going to put the pressure so that you're going to be driving faster on your road, and at the same time, you're compacting soil surface. And what does soil surface do? What does soil surface compaction do? Well, it will kill that zone where the germination occurs. And we've seen up to 95% less roots in a surface compaction layer. And if you look at the root system that's shown here, this is a wheat root system, and I'm going to come back to that root over and over. But you could see that within the first 30 centimeters, you can have almost like 80 to 90% of the total root system in that area. But yet, you can have up to 5%, which is not more, which is not big, but this 5% will occur at about a meter deep. This 5% can provide up to 20% of the water that the plants need. I need that 5% to get there. I need it. To protect our soil porosity, then, we've got to look at a maximum of 12.5, just 0.9 bar in air pressure in our tire. And we can do that. It is very highly possible. And the second part of compaction is subsoil compaction, and this is where we get to avoid going over 3.5 tons per wheel. You knew all these numbers, right? I'm just repeating it. We did this little exercise. This is a kind of machinery I'm dealing with, the tractor that's pulling that machine, and the weight that we have is 4 tons per axle, which becomes just about 2 tons per wheel. I'm always going to be working per wheel. 4 tons per wheel and 5 tons in the back wheel. And the red numbers are the pressure that the farmer put in his tire. The green one are the one that I calculated. And these are safe pressure. I just didn't pull out a number like that. I did a lot of calculation to make sure that these numbers are safe. And so we can see the difference that it's going to do in our soil. So I guess on your right, you see the high pressure, and you see the impact that it has in the soil profile. And remember that root system. And so if I go to 6 pounds, you see that the impact at the soil surface is really diminished. And as I go with higher weight per wheel, you can see the impact that it does. And as you go at the end of your system here, I have 5 tons, 35 pounds, see the impact that it has in the soil. This is killing me. Every time I do that and I show that to farmers, this is just saying, you know, you're telling me that your yields are not going to be great, but then you're doing it to yourself. So just by lowering by half the air pressure, we almost saved all the surface compaction. And you could see as well that even though we diminished by half the air pressure in the tire, we didn't lower that much the soil compaction, the subsoil compaction. And this is something that we have to find out a lot more. You see that that 7.25 C line is, I wish, ideally, I don't want to have the yellow part going below that line. And so every time I go below that line, I'm having some subsurface compaction. And this is what it does to the bulk density. If you're working in a dry condition, because every now and then we're saying if you're working in a dry condition, you're giving less compaction, but you're having a stronger effect on the bulk density. As you get to the optimal condition and as you get to the wet condition, you can see the impact on bulk density. The bulk density is that part in our compacted soil. As the bulk density increases, the amount of minerals in the volume of my soil increases as well. Less space for the root system, less space for the water holding capacity. Now, I take the same example and I put a second set of tires on that load that I have. So I'm going down from 7 tons per wheel, and I'm going down to 3.5 tons per wheels. I just wanted to show you the impact that it does on the soil just by adding a set of wheels. And I hope this really makes sense to all of you. It is one big challenge that I've been working with. It's the compaction challenge. I'm not sure I said it here, but we estimated that in Quebec that 80% of our agricultural soils are suffering from compaction. And I cannot get into healthy soil thinking that the compacted one can get healthier. It's gonna get healthier as the compaction diminish. And if I want to get rid of the compaction, I have to rethink all my machinery setup. And so 1 axle, 2 axle, and again, I come back with the root system. Now somebody is gonna tell me, how about control traffic? Nobody's saying it? Well, it's not only if you can, it's the matter of the control traffic is giving you the idea that instead of compacting the whole of your field, you're gonna be compacting only 10% of it. Because these big machinery are still going to be using 10% of your surface area. These compacted area are not producing. You're losing 10% of your profit. We might as well think right now to say, how can I manage to lower my system down to 3.5 tons per wheel, and I'm going to make a lot more money? And I know this is very difficult. And I put that little graph in as well, because every now and then there's someone that comes to me and says, how about horses? Horses, they're very, very high on surface compaction. And you see the horses, the animal, what it does, but it's very, very a shallow effect as the big tractors that we're having now. The only thing right now that is damaging a lot more than our tractor are a proboscis dinosaurus. Again, it's the impact of the root system. We've got to think about the root system a lot more. We've got the genetics today that is preventing us of thinking about the root system, I think. A few months ago, I was at a show where there's somebody that came up with a hybrid that was fighting compaction. And I was talking right next to him, and I said, can you imagine that hybrid compacting compaction in a very healthy soil? It's going to go down meters and meters. So we've got to think about the soil first, and we've got to think about the diversity as well. These are very interesting numbers. Have you ever thought about how long your root system can be in your soil? Did any one of you have ever measured that? No one? Well, some researcher did it, and for corn, for example, in a very healthy soil, it could go up to 200,000 kilometers per hectare of root system. In a permanent pasture, it can go up to 95,000 kilometers per hectare. Doesn't that impress you? I keep being very impressed with these numbers. We cannot think about that, but it all depends on the quality of your soil, on the healthy part of your soil. Now, another thing that I like to add when I talk about soil compaction and what is happening, and we always talk about organic matter, and this is the data that are from the United States, and then a lot of researchers find out, they put in other numbers that before agriculture came in, we had this system with forests and very high diversity root system and very different level of root system. The diversity is in the plant is in the size of the roots, in the depth that they're going to explore. And so at one point, we came in with agriculture with the perennial, and then we came in with the annual, and what it did is that it only decreased the organic matter that we have in the soil. And as John Kemp just mentioned it before me, we have that top 6-inch layer that we can calculate the organic matter into it, but we have the bottom as well. And this is this very high quality organic matter that we've been losing over time. We've been losing it, and this organic matter is turning really at a very slow rate. The top 6 inches, this organic matter, this carbon there, is turning on a period of maybe 5 to 10 years. But the lower one, the very high quality, might take 100 years to turn around. But we've been losing it. We're still, and this is something that we are noticing as well, is that even though we're getting into very healthy practices, the organic matter is still going down because the part that we are losing is this very high quality part that we're not replenishing. And so we can do things to improve, so we can work with the cover, all the cover crops. We can work with the root system, put more roots in the system. We can work with having new ways of doing it to improve the soil porosity, which becomes to the crop concept that I'm going to be talking to you. But even though we're doing that, we're not going to be able to go back to the original organic matter that we had in our system. And on top of that, the texture of our soil and the climate is going to have an influence onto the organic matter level doing back together. Does that make sense? And therefore, there's another thing that I wanted to say to you also is that the organic matter is being built by the residue. And when we started to do no-till, they were telling us that if we want to have a better organic matter in our soil, no-till was the best thing because all of these residue would be a very good input to organic matter. Only 8% of the carbon in these residue will end up in our soil organic matter. Only 8% of the carbon in these residue will end up in our soil organic matter. If you look at cover crop, and if you look at manure, that will go up to 12 to 23% of the carbon in our cover crop that will end up in the soil organic matter. But now, how about the root system? How much of the carbon in the root system will become soil organic matter? Up to 45%. 45% of the carbon in our root system will turn out into soil organic matter. So it's another important fact to say that I've got to put more roots in my system. I've got to feed my soil with the roots. That brings me to my crop system, CROP, which is we call it crop because these 4 symbols has to be worked out together to make our agricultural system work. The first one, the C, is for cover. The R is for roots. The O is for oxygen, and P is for porosity. We need to move forwards these 4 actions together. The cover, and what we've been doing over and over and over is we've been looking at each one separately. The cover, which comes with no-till and leave the most cover on top of your soil, we know it protects the soil. We have a less temperature difference during the day. We have a sun protection. When you look at the root system, at the rotation, we know all of these advantages, and as well when we look at porosity. So every one of them can encourage us to use a certain system. That's how we started. At least that's how I started my life 36 years ago, by talking about no-till. No-till was supposed to solve every problem. It did not. It just didn't. Then we started to understand that all of these have, not only do they have personal impact, but they also have an impact on the other one. So the cover has an impact on the root system, as it is when there's less crusting, when there's a better germination, then I'm going to have better root growth. And the same thing, the root system has an impact on the cover itself. If I look at the cover on the porosity, the root system on porosity, if I have a very high root system, then I'm going to have more microbial life. More microbial life means deeper exploration. It also means more of that glomalin production. So higher my root system, higher my soil structure, less compaction I'm going to have. And I can go there all the way from the porosity to the root system. If I have a very high porosity in my soil, I'm going to have a very high root system production as well. And then if you look at porosity and the cover, we all know what it does. If I have a very compacted soil, the cover is going to keep my soil cool, and it's going to have an effect on the planting date. So no-till was not working because the porosity was not ideal. And we need to put all of that together in order to have a very high successful health practices. When I hear, and I hear that a lot, I'm going to get into any soil practices. I'm going to get into no-till. I know I'm going to have some yield loss. I know it's going to take me 5 to 6 to 8 years to get into a normal situation. I don't want to hear that. If you're having a yield loss, it's because we didn't find the right strategy to get you into healthy soil. We need to do all of these steps, and we need to go forward. For example, let's say I do a good cover, and I do a good root system, meaning my commercial and fertility rotation, but then my soil is compacted. What is it going to happen? Well, the warming is going to be more difficult. The nutrients are going to have more difficulty to get to the root system, and so I'm going to put a lot of energy into changing a system, and it's not going to be working. And we did the same thinking with the root system. What if I go into no-till and I leave all my residue in, and I take a lot of time making sure that my machinery is not too heavy and my air pressure tire is great, but then I'm growing only one crop and I'm not doing any cover crop. So the same thing is going to happen. I'm going to have less glomalin production from my microbes. The structural stability is going to be less. The compaction is going to be greater. The amount of residue on top of the soil is going to be all the same. I'm always inducing the same problem that I'm looking at. And we did the same thinking with the crop, the cover. And this one I like very much because as you see this soil, you really have a strong feeling that it's not going to be working. It just won't be working. The germination is going to be lacking. The root system is going to be lacking. The porosity is not going to be improved as well. So we need to have all of these together. Does that make sense? And this is something I've been working a lot, is we might talk about all of the soil system. We might talk about cover crops, machinery. We can talk about soil cover that we leave a lot. If we don't do it all at the same time, it's not going to be working. We cannot get into cover crop alone. We need to have that cover. We need to have that, we need to have the porosity taken care of in order to make it work. And the first step is, of course, to get into soil profile. I started talking to you about the soil profile, and I was really surprised to see how many of you are really doing soil profile. When I'm asking farmers how much time do they spend on machinery taking care of, I would get hundreds of hours a year. And I would dream that you would spend hundreds of hours a year doing soil profile as well. So if I ask you now, do you spend as much time doing soil profile than you're doing tractor maintenance? What? Oh, God, more? How many of you spend more times digging soil?
If you have an agronomist that don't have a spade in the car, fire it.
Yes, I agree. I agree. And most of the time, if the farmer steals your shovel, then you have to buy another one. Is there any question? Yeah.
You didn't mention earthworms. I see a problem in compacted soils where you are going to go regenerative and you have a bad beginning point. The problem is that you can grow cover crops, but you can introduce the earthworms very rapidly. So what are we going to do? Because as I see, they only can come from edges and plantings in the fields and so on, and they take a long time to get a population growing all over the field. As I see it, earthworms is a big part of healthy soil, also for releasing nutrients, and residues are released with the nutrients from the earthworms.
This is a very good question. Earthworms, they will reproduce if there's food. So I've seen fields with no earthworms at all. When we started, we were from plowing situation and we got into with a lot of residue. And it took us 8 years before we could get the big anisic one. So you have 3 big families of earthworm, right? You have the small one, the epigetic one, which are working at the soil surface, and they're going to work the soil residue at the soil surface. You have the endogeic one that are moving within your soil. You don't ever see them. If you don't do any soil profile, you don't see them because they never go out of the soil. And so they're picking the soil surface mixed residue, and they're bringing it down, and they're going to take care of the root system as well. And then you have the anisic one. So the 2 first one, they're moving along. So they might be able to move along. The anisic one, they live in their tunnel for all of their lives. The further they will go on is just about 3 to 5 meters a year. So if you don't have any earthworms in your field, and if your neighbor doesn't have any earthworm either, and if the other neighbor doesn't have any earthworm either, it's going to take forever to get these big ones because they'll have to come from otherwise. So in the States, they're starting to plant earthworms. But you need to plant the big one, not the small one, the big one. If your neighbor has earthworms, then they'll fill in your field with times. But it's not a spontaneous population thing. You need to have them. Few members of them, that'll be fine. But then with time and food, they will reproduce. Yes? I can't hear you.
Do you have any information on how much more fuel you use when you reduce the tire pressure?
Oh, no, I use less fuel. When I download the tire pressure, I can use up to 15% less fuel than with high pressure tire. Yeah, less fuel consumption. Sorry about that. But we're using less fuel.
What you're saying about the crop residue and only 8% turns into organic matter, does the carbon to nitrogen ratio affect that?
I would say so because they're a very high carbon to nitrogen ratio, and so to decompose all of that, the microorganism that will decompose it will need a lot of energy to get that carbon back to the soil, and so it will take its energy within the residue that they're decomposing. So this is mainly the reason why, even though we thought it was a good way of getting into more organic matter, only 8% of these very high carbon to nitrogen ratio residue are going down to the soil organic matter. But it's not because it's only 8% that goes there. The main advantage of these residue is to cover the soil and protect it. It's protecting it from the impact of the water drop, and it's protecting it from the sun as well. So we need this residue to be there, but we shouldn't count on them to improve very much the organic matter level in our soil. This will go with the root system, and we need these roots to be there. Yes? Oh.
Hi, you mentioned horses. Have you looked at the impact of large groups of cattle mob grazing in a small area on compaction?
Well, I have to be honest with you. I'm amazed with mob grazing, but we're not doing that very much in Quebec. But every now and then, when I go to the States or Ontario, there's some people that are doing it. The challenge that we have is that we don't want these animals to go more than once at one place. So we've got to calculate, and we've got to put in some rotation planning so that every spaces of my field will not suffer more than once one of these animal foot. Does that make sense? not much. What I mean is that they have to go through, and they cannot go back. I just want them to go once. And so if they do that, the impact on soil will be very, very, very less. In fact, the hoof work and the saliva from these animals are very good for the soil health. The problem is if they keep on walking all the time, then it kills the soil surface. Does that make more sense? I didn't hear what you say. Or should I? It makes sense. Because the only other way I'm going to be able to explain it to you is in French.
Hi. I use a subsoiler occasionally. Is that a dirty word?
No. There's no dirty word. It's just the overuse of that machinery. Subsoiling is really, really interesting. And again, probably my next question is, how deep do you work your subsoil?
15, 20, 25 inches?
Okay, 15, 25 inches is quite a range. So
20 inches?
So you're telling me, take the number you want, it'll be good. But what is the need of your soil to be subsoil?
Well, I'm only just really starting on my regenerative journey, so
Okay.
trying to help myself with my cover crops.
The first thing, so I guess you didn't do any soil profile.
Not enough, obviously.
Because the subsoiling has to be defined with respect to where you need to subsoil. So when I do a soil profile and I see that compacted layer maybe at 14 inches deep, okay? Then I know that my subsoil has to be done 4 inches below that, okay? The subsoil has to be done at the right depth. If you do it above, then you're not going to do anything good. And if you do it too deep, you're not doing anything good either. You need to know where the compaction layer is in your soil, and then you go 4 inches, which is 10 centimeter deeper than your compacted layer. Then it has to be done at the right humidity of your soil. Not when you say, well, it's been dry for a week, the topsoil is dry, then I can go. No, it has to be the right humidity at the depth that you're going to be working. Okay? This is one thing that's very important. And before you're going to be subsoiling, you're going to implant your cover crops. Something a week, 10 days before, you're going to implant it. Then you're going to subsoil at the right depth, the right humidity, and the root system that are getting in the soil are going to be lodging in the cracks that you're providing with subsoil. After subsoiling, you get out of your field, you go fish, you go read, you come here, you stay here for 2 weeks, you don't go back in your field for at least a month. Does that make sense?
Yeah, very helpful, thank you.
And subsoil is like a chemo treatment. You never want to have more than once in your life. You don't want to get into chemo, but if you have to, you don't want to do it twice. So you need to know, why is that compaction there? And so if you don't fix the compaction problem, you'll just have to come back and come back and come back. And what causes mainly that compaction at 14 inches? Something that weighs 4 to 4.5 tons per wheel. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, in your dismissal of CTF, you quote a figure of 10% uncropped. Probably in the UK, even the best systems would be travelling on, so compacting 15% of the ground, and the less good systems possibly 30% of the ground. But nonetheless, they are still producing a crop. In your figures on compaction, you didn't specify the crop reduction in yield in the wheelways in your random traffic systems. Within the UK, trials at agricultural colleges are seeing that there is indeed a reduction in yield on the trafficked areas within CTF. But the untrafficked areas are increasing in yield because of the zero damage that is being done to the soil compaction, the soil structure, which is in fact adding to the yield, and the net benefit is positive towards controlled traffic farming.
Yeah, you're right.
Right.
Yeah.
So taking on board all your arguments for reducing the tyre pressures and being conscious of the damage that vehicles do to the ground, I think CTF does create a benefit. And within the conscious of a CTF farmer, they will be taking on board all the aspects of your argument. So why are you negative towards CTF?
I think you just gave me my answer. If you're getting into CTF with the what I've said about adjusting your tractor to avoid compaction, which is 12.5 0.9 bar for air pressure and 3.5 tons per wheel, then your CTF is you could work all over the field and that'll be fine. You know, it's the 3.5 tons per wheel that is the set-off point. And I'm saying 3.5 ton, and I should be cautious because at some farmers it might be 4, and at others it might be 3. But the rule of thumb is if you don't go over 3.5 tons per wheel and you work in proper condition, you're not harming your soil. Now, if on top of that you're CTF, then everything's perfect. But most of the time, the people that are going into controlled traffic system, they keep on having that very heavy machinery equipment. So if I'm working with something that weighs 5, 6, 7 tons per wheel, and I kill like 10% of my field, that's good for today, and that's good for maybe the next 5 years. But in 5 or 10 years, the machinery setup changes for any reason, these 10% area are going to be dead forever. And they've been doing studies in Denmark, and in 1980, they compacted soil normally, and then they just take care of it. No special care, but just look at what time does, and 40 years afterwards, we couldn't get back to the original quality of the soil. And the main problem was not the bulk density, but the porosity of your soil. So we had a better porosity, bulk density over time, but then the porosity, the capacity of the roots of the water to go from one spot to the other was decreased. So CTF is good as long as you respect at the same time the pressure and the weight per wheel. It's good, it's perfect. But if you overboard, then you're gonna be. And of course, if you're overboard, you might as well reduce 10% of your surface area that you damage than the whole surface area. But the first step is to think about your hair pressure and the weight per wheel. Does that make sense?
It does, absolutely, yes. Yeah, as a first step, absolutely.
And 20 years ago, I was the first one to talk about CTF. I was saying to everyone, that's going to solve every problem. Then we had study in Canada that says it didn't solve anything. Then we had these searchers from Europe that came and talked to us about the hair pressure and the weight per wheel. And then we're starting to say, yeah, first step, CTF is good, as long as you take care of that.
Well, I'd take your low ground pressures and reducing vehicle weight as your first step. And that's the low-hanging fruit, particularly with the investment that tyre manufacturers put into development of Ultraflex tyres and what have you.
I know, but there are ways to do that. You know, as long as we know and we talk about it, then you're going to buy some new machinery sometimes. And if you know about it, maybe you're going to choose something that's going to harm less your soil. This is the way we have to look at it. It's not a one-day deal. It's knowing about it that will make you take the right step forward when you have a decision to make.
it's about taking the holistic approach, isn't it? So
It's about knowing our soil and trust that this soil is capable of doing a lot more without us.
Sorry, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Just in relation to cover crops, rather than sowing cover crops, sorry, here.
Where are you?
I'm just
Okay.
just allowing natural regeneration to happen rather than actually sowing cover crops at the end of after harvest. Is there any work done on that? So not going in, so therefore no compaction, just letting...
Oh, you say planting cover crops after harvesting?
Well, not planting them, just let whatever grows grow on the ground at that stage. So it'll be some weed seeds that come out the back of the combine, some of the smaller grains that come out of the back of the combine, just to let those germinate and form a cover crop that way, so you're not going back on the ground again.
I like to go back and plant something to break the cycle of the plant. If I go out of wheat and I leave wheat grow back, it's just like wheat on wheat and sometimes something else afterwards. But if I take that time to put something else in the ground, I'm gonna have a biodiversity of different root system. I'm gonna have a biodiversity of different architecture of plants on top of the soil. I'm gonna be able to work with a lot more of different insects, pollinators, and so on. So no, I'm always going, whenever I have time, I harvest and I plant. And I say to all my farmers, the planter is following the harvester. Just don't lose any time between harvest and planting. All of these minutes are important for that germination and the root system to take his job, to do his job. I want to finish with this little song. This is a group that we have in Quebec that's been singing for the past 20 years. And I just translated from French, and I really like what they're saying there, and I've been carrying this little thing along. Life isn't just one long purgatory. If it's true that you have to fight every day, it won't be in vain. Effort makes you appreciate good wine. I didn't find anything to rhyme with beer, but I guess you understand what I mean. We need to work these new systems. We need to reinvent agriculture, and we need to trust ourselves in doing so. It's working. It really is working. And there's a lot of pride into a very, very good agriculture. Thank you very much for the time you spent with me.